Plan, creating learning objectives. Previously, we discussed that to be a great teacher, you have to figure out how to improve every part of your communication system. You need to have tools that help you tune into the transmission. You need to figure out how to clearly communicate what you have learned. You need to choose a method of communicating that works best for you and your students. And you need to find the right people and communicate to them in a way that they respond to. Learning objectives help you to be both a better receiver and a better transmitter. When you ask the question, what exactly is it that I want to transmit to my students? It makes you become much more specific in your communication. The big difference between just giving out information and actually teaching is assessment. Assessment is critical to helping you improve your teaching, and it's critical to helping your learners become confident in what they are learning. Assessment shows them concretely that they have achieved something. If you just give out information, that's marketing because you don't know whether someone learned anything. You may wonder if people could get the same information you are putting into your course by watching a YouTube video. Probably so, but there's no assessment from a teacher to help the student know whether they are actually making progress toward learning that skill, toward the light bulb moment. In other words, the presence of a teacher, the teacher's support and encouragement, the teacher's comments and concerns are what make a course valuable. Assessment isn't synonymous with testing. It can be anything that helps you see that your students learned. Written tests are a form of assessment, but not always the best way to evaluate whether students are learning. One reason you were given so many written tests in school is that your teachers were preparing you to take standardized tests. So one of the overarching objectives that those teachers had for you was to perform well in written tests. With adult learners, taking written tests is not generally a big part of what you are preparing your students for. In some professional training, that would be appropriate, like preparing people for passing an accounting certification. If you are not needing students to pass written tests, there are so many other ways to see whether they are learning. You don't need to administer any kind of special assessment. You can just be aware of how students are participating in class, the questions they ask, whether they pay attention or are able to do the thing that you want them to do. I have a course on making videos, and my assessment is, can they make a video and upload it to YouTube? I'll ask them to send me the link. A basic concept of instructional design is that you cannot know whether someone learns what you teach them. But if you can't tell whether they know what you are teaching, how can you assess? When you design a lesson, a course, or a curriculum, you want to think about what activities your students will be able to do that indicates that they learned. Then you can assess whether your students can do that activity. So no, you can't measure whether someone knows how to drive, but you can look for them to change lanes on a highway with ease. You can't know whether a student understands management principles, but you can ask them to report that they presented their ideas at a team meeting. When you design a course, you want to think about what behaviors your students will exhibit that indicate that they learned, and you want to be realistic about what your students will be able to do, given the limited amount of time they will spend studying, the materials that will be available to them, and what is known about how every student progresses through learning. When thinking about what you will measure, one thing not to measure is how long it is taking the student to figure it out. Some people are quick learners, others are methodical. Sometimes the people who pick up concepts quickly miss out on detail, while the slower learners may be more meticulous. Sometimes it just takes people longer to learn. They are still learning. A learning objective is a statement that describes what students should be able to do after they complete your training materials. Another way of saying this is that your role as a teacher is to help your students get to that light bulb moment, to a place where they integrate whatever you are teaching seamlessly into their way of thinking, their way of moving, and the behaviors that they adopt. An objective is not a goal. It's not important that students be able to do what you want them to do at the end of the lesson. What's important is moving them closer to the light bulb moment. One of the reasons people dislike standardized tests is because It makes the assessment a goal instead of an objective. Not every person learns at the same pace. Not every person comes into a class with the same background. It's not possible that every student will be able to perform the same way, even when they are studying the same information. An objective is what you hope they will do. An objective helps you design a good yardstick so you can articulate to your students what you would like from them. An objective helps you communicate more clearly. An objective helps you provide useful observations to your students about the progress that you see them making compared to what you would like them to achieve. When your student has their eureka moment, it will never look exactly as you envision it because each person is unique and comes to class with their own view of the world. It is recommended that you begin a class by letting students know what your objectives are for them. This helps them to focus because it gives them an idea of why you are presenting the information and what they should be getting out of it. Knowing the learning objectives before they learn eases students' anxieties about you as a teacher. It builds trust. It shows that you are fair, that you have a plan for them, and that they can succeed. It helps them envision what it looks like to succeed. An objective is useful for you as a teacher to help you figure out how well you are teaching. If you were able to get students to the objective, what you are presenting is working. In a live class, if students are not succeeding at reaching the objective or succeeding more quickly than expected, you can adjust your material on the fly. Before you record any materials, I recommend that you run your course materials as a beta first until you consistently get students to the learning objectives. That's when the material is really solid. Another big advantage of learning objectives, and we'll talk more about this later, is that when you go through the process of writing the objectives, it helps you to see what is realistic for students to actually be able to do based on what we know about how people learn. A learning objective is a sentence written in a very specific format. It always contains these stock phrases. By the end of, the student will be able to, given. To create a learning objective, you just fill in the blanks. So let's take a look at some examples first, and then I'll break out how you fill in each part of this sentence. Here is an example of a learning objective for a lesson about needs and emotions. By the end of the lesson, the student will be able to select their own needs, given a list of needs. Here is an example of a learning objective for a 6-week meditation course. By the end of the class, the student will be able to attempt sitting still for meditation, given a meditation pillow and instructions at the start. Here is an example of a learning objective for a nutrition program. By the end of the program, the student will be able to follow the diet recommendations, given a handout with approved foods. Here is an example of a learning objective for this lesson. If you succeed at this objective, then I will know that my course materials are working and useful. If not, then I will need to add more information to help you. It's also possible that the conversations that we have around this objective lead me to decide to teach more in-depth information about this material in another course, or add on to this course to make it even more complete. The objective is, by the end of the lesson, the student will be able to demonstrate writing a learning objective given the Beginning Course Creators card deck. Now that you have seen a few examples, let's go back and look at each of the elements in the learning objective sentence. The sentence begins by the end of the learning event. The learning event creates a time-bound learning objective. If you are planning for what they will know by the end of a 1-hour lesson, that's going to limit how much learning can take place as opposed to after 12 weeks. What is reasonable for a student to accomplish within the time that you have to teach them? Then the next stock part of the phrase is the student will be able to, which indicates who is doing the learning. When you write a learning objective, you need to consider who your class participants are. You're writing an objective for your students. Are you teaching adults or children? Are you teaching people who come in with some previous knowledge of your subject? Do these people have special learning needs? Are they busy with outside commitments? Are they full-time students who can completely focus on this course? Are they tech savvy or do they barely know how to use their cell phones? One of the things that makes it very hard to create your first online class is not having enough students that you are currently working with. We spend so much of the robot leg learning more about your students and their needs so that you can develop great training for those students that you are meant to serve. Then you choose a learning verb. Surprisingly, you just choose one from a list called a learning taxonomy. Your cards include all the verbs for a beginner level course. We'll talk about learning taxonomies more and selecting verbs in just a minute. It deserves some extra attention. The skill is the action that you want your student to be able to perform. You can be very specific when you write these, but you can also write it out as a list or in a general way. For example, if you're teaching them terms and definitions, which is part of every beginner course, then you could say the learning skill is to be able to use beginner terms in class. And then you could have a whole list of words in a document titled beginner terms. If you're teaching a physical skill like an aerobics class, you could group all the beginning exercises into a set and then say they will be able to do all the exercises in that set. You can get really detailed if you need to, but the point of this exercise is for you to get clear on what you are teaching, not to force you to do a bunch of tedious, unnecessary work. The last part of the equation is given, and after this, you want to spell out anything that the student might need to be successful at learning, such as supplies, or demonstration, or access to the internet. This helps you to think through what kinds of materials they will need to gather beforehand, or which you will need to prepare, and think about how you might handle it if you can't get those things. Now let's review those examples again. Let's say this is an online lesson and that you're keeping each lesson to 15 minutes. So here, after watching a 15-minute video explaining the concept of needs, you could reasonably expect them to circle appropriate words on a list. They're going to need the list of words so that they can circle them. This is a good objective for the amount of time the students spend learning and for the method of instruction. It's also possible to give an assessment. You could ask them to snap a photo of the exercise and email it to you. You could set up the words as an online test or form. You could ask the students to report the words they circled on an online discussion or comment. Here's the example for the course objectives for the 6-week meditation course. If you wrote this objective, you would know that you need to have a way to supply pillows to the students before the course begins. You could supply a list of sources or include it as part of the expenses of the course. And you would be able to assess this very easily. Just open your eyes and see if they're sitting while you teach the meditation. You also recognize what is realistic for a rote beginner to be able to do after only 6 lessons. Try to follow instructions. For the nutrition program, you know you will need to prepare a handout of the approved foods in the program. You will also need to plan out the diet recommendations and be able to communicate them. Now, as you build the entire program, you can see clearly what you're moving your students toward, and you can prepare the individual courses and lessons they will need to achieve that. Many course creators want to teach adults how to adopt a habit or perform a physical skill. Because we have spent so much time being taught in a school setting where we are learning mental skills, we often don't have a good sense of how to teach other types of skills. In the field of instructional design, there are 3 domains of learning. The mental domain, we're all familiar with this from school. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are all skills in the mental domain. The second is the physical domain, and that covers how to learn a psychomotor skill like what I teach, yoga. Driving, playing a musical instrument, and learning a sport are other examples of physical domain skills. This domain also includes fine motor skills. Learning to draw, paint, sew, work with wood, or any other work with your hands are all in the physical domain. The third taxonomy is the behavioral domain. That's how you change behaviors and habits. So if you want to teach healthy eating, how to become more mindful, how to become a leader, how to incorporate exercise into your daily life, or how to keep your home clean, you should base your course on the behavioral domain. One of the most important insights of instructional design is that people learn in a step-by-step fashion. Even a professional driver starts with their hands at the 10 and the 2, trying to figure out which pedal is the brake and which is the gas. This is a really loose guide, but I think it takes about 2 years to go from a rote beginner up to a master of any subject, that moment where the light bulb goes on. What is a curriculum? A curriculum takes a learner through a learning transformation. It maps out a complete set of courses that it takes to get a learner to the light bulb moment. The steps that you just saw for beginner, intermediate, and advanced learning are a highly simplified graphic illustrating a tool that we use in instructional design called a learning taxonomy. A taxonomy is a list of skills that are reasonable to expect learners to perform at beginner, intermediate, and advanced skill levels. In other words, if we are assessing whether a learner is achieving mastery of a subject, then these are the behaviors we want to observe. Your beginning course creator's card deck only includes words from the beginning taxonomy. So here you see a complete set of skills for the mental learning taxonomy. By the end of an entire curriculum, we expect learners to demonstrate creativity and act knowledgeably. But in the beginning, we know from studies of how people learn that all they will be able to do is memorize and recognize terms and definitions and apply what they are learning to summarize or compare and contrast. An entire curriculum would include beginner, intermediate, and advanced skills. These are the steps for the physical domain. These words show how a learner progresses in learning a physical skill. First, they observe a demonstration, then they copy the teacher's actions. Eventually, their movements are graceful, automatic, and spontaneous, and we design learning for each of these steps, moving the learner from the beginner through the intermediate to the advanced skills. And we even know the steps that it takes for people to adopt new behaviors. It begins with being directed and following instructions as told, but it ends with them internalizing those behaviors, teaching others, and serving as a leader. In this lesson, you learned a lot about how people learn best. You learned how to write learning objectives for mental, physical, and behavioral skills. Next, you will try to apply this knowledge by creating your own learning objectives for your webinar or course. By the end of this entire curriculum, not only will you have built your own curriculum, but you will understand innately how to do it, and you will be able to teach others how to do it.